So in part one of this video, we saw how do we find the equilibrium output when investment is allowed to depend upon output rather than taking investment to be exogenously given. So now we want to look at and compare the multiplier in the version of the model in which investment is exogenous versus when investment depends upon output. So first we'll just do a purely a mathematical comparison and then we look at the economic intuition. So in part B, now the old multiplier when B1 is equal to 0, which means that I is just equal to B naught, investment is exogenously given, is 1 by 1 minus C1. Now the new multiplier, when B1 is not equal to 0, i.e. investment is equal to B naught plus B1, right? So investment depends upon output in this case, is 1 by 1 minus C1 minus B1. So let's do a mathematical comparison first. So if you want to do a mathematical comparison, so now notice over here, 1 minus C1 minus B1 is less than 1 minus C1. How do we know that? We know that because B1 is greater than 0. Because investment positively depends upon income. Because obviously output is used as an indicator of how well the economy is doing. So when the economy is doing better, firms will invest more as they expect demand to be more, right? So B1 in this case is greater than 0. So that's why 1 minus C1 minus B1 is less than 1 minus C1. And what this is essentially, this is the denominator of the new multiplier. And this is the denominator of the old multiplier. Now, since the denominator of the new multiplier is smaller, so 1 minus C1 minus P1 is greater than 1 minus C1. This is the new, this is the new multiplier. And this is the old multiplier. Let's just erase this. Let me just connect this. Right, so what we've done is we've done a pure mathematical comparison where we've talked about how when investment depends upon output, our denominator of a new multiplier is smaller, so then our new multiplier is larger than the old multiplier, because for a fraction, the smaller the denominator is, the bigger the overall fraction is. This was a pure mathematical comparison. Let's look at some economic intuition of this result now. So now let's look at economic intuition of why multiplier is different. Let's look at some economic intuition. So for this, recall in the standard goods market model, in which we took investment to not depend upon output, in the standard goods model, we learned the multiplier works in the following way. If, say, G increases. So what happens is, we know okay, as G increases, demand increases. And why is that? Because since Z is equal to C, we know one of the components of demand is G, right? So as G increases, Z increases, right? That's what happens first in the multiply process. Then when Z increases, that causes Y to increase, since short-run assumption is output is demand determined. Since short-run assumption is output is demand determinant, right? Output is whatever demand wants it to be, right? So an increase in demand will cause output to increase. Now, when Y increases, that causes C to increase. Now, why is that? Because in our model, we know the only variable that in our standard model depended upon Y was C, right? I did not depend on it. Since C is equal to C naught plus C1 Y minus T. So here as Y increases, C increases. So right now, I'm just looking at how the multiply process works. So now when C increases, Z increases further. Why is that? Because C is also a component of demand. Since Z is equal to C plus I plus G. If we're looking at a closed economy, so we don't need to write NX here. So when C increases, Z increases further. When Z increases, we know Y increases further, right? Because the short-term assumption is output is demand determined, output is whatever demand wants it to be, right? So again, it's just like the same short-term assumption. And this process continues until we reach, and this process continues until we reach a new equilibrium such that total change in equilibrium Y is greater than total change in G. Like this was how the multiplier worked in the standard goods market model. So you increase G, demand increase. When demand increases, output increases. Since output is whatever demand wants it to be. When output increases, C, which depends upon Y, will increase. And then since C is a component of demand, I would further increase demand, which would further increase output. And then this would further increase C. And this process will keep on continuing, right? Until we reach our new equilibrium. So this was in the standard goods market model, in which the only variable that depended upon Y was C. But now things have changed. How have they changed? And that now let's not clear all of this up. Let's just clear this part up, and we'll keep this part still there. So let's just clear that up, right? So now let's see. Now in the standard goods market model, I did not depend on Y, right? Upon Y, but now I depends on Y. So there we had I is equal to I bar. Now we have I is equal to B naught plus B1Y, right? So now after a positive change in autonomous spending, right, like the increasing G we had, after a positive change in autonomous spending as Y increases, now not only C increases, but I increases also. Now not only C increases, but I increases also, right? Initially, we saw in this multiplier process, so what we're trying to say, we know C will increase because C depends upon Y, right? C is equal to C naught plus C1 Y minus T, right? Depends upon Y. But now I also depends upon Y. I is B naught plus B1 Y, right? So the idea is this, in this multiplier process, we saw that when G increases, Z increases. When Z increases, Y increases. Now when Y increases, initially only C increased. But now over here, I will also increase now, right? I will also increase here. And when C increases and when I increases, when they both increase, Z will increase. So the increase in demand will be more also, because now not only C is increasing, I is increasing. When demand is increasing by more, output is increasing by more. And when this Y increases, then this will again increase both C and I. So the idea is that initially the multiplier process was only working through C, but now it's working through both things, through C and I. Right over here, when demand increases, so that increased output. And when output increased, now not only C, but investment will also increase, because now not only C, but also I depends upon Y. So over here, we'll have an additional increase in the form of I. So when both C and I are increasing, so the increase in demand will be more than before when only C was increasing. So now when the increase in demand is more, that will increase output more, and this output will again increase both C and I. So this process will keep on continuing. So the idea over here is, so what we're trying to say that now the multiplier effect works through two channels. Thus now the multiplier effect works through two channels. Consumption and investment. And hence the multiplier when investment depends upon Y is bigger. Right? Because initially we know the multiplier effect was because whenever Y increase, C increases. But now not only C, but I also increases, and that allows the multiplier to work through these two channels and result in a larger multiplier than if investment was exogenously given and did not depend upon Y. So this is the economic intuition of why the multipliers are different.